Hello, my name is David Bryan, and this is Curiosity Invited, a podcast inspired by endless curiosity. Tune in for an open-minded conversation about interesting and important things. Hello, and welcome to Curiosity Invited. My name is David Bryan, and today I have the great pleasure of speaking with Luthern Williams. Luthern is a visionary educator and is the head of New Road School, a place near and dear to my heart, a school in Santa Monica, California. Luthern holds a bachelor's from University of Pennsylvania and an educational master's in school leadership from Harvard University. Previously, before he became the head of New Road School, he was the assistant head of school for program at New Roads and the middle school director. Luthern has 25 years of experience as an administrator and an English teacher in independent schools in New York, Boston, and Los Angeles. He serves as the director of college preparation and college admissions at College Launch, an educational consulting company, the director of studies at Oakwood School in North Hollywood, California, and the upper school director at Beaver Country Day School in Boston, Massachusetts, and the director of diversity at the Winsor School in Boston, Massachusetts. What does Luthern care about educationally? Throughout his career, Luthern has drawn on his knowledge of education to align schools' programs with their missions and to build educational models where all children thrive, where they learn love, respect, empathy, and compassion, and they developed tools to create a world based on the inherent dignity and worth of every individual. To prepare teachers to educate for this new world, Luthern has contributed to the design and redesign and development of one of the premier teacher induction and professional development programs for independent schools in this nation. And also he's created professional development processes in many independent schools. In addition, Luthern has trained teachers to devise strategies and assessments for students with various learning styles, as well as culturally sensitive teaching methods and curricula. Luthern has done talks, interviews, presentations, and workshops about education at the local, state, national, and international level, including speaking on a panel for the United States Department of Education, Office of Nonprofit Education. He's consulted nationally on education, and he's written articles for this field, in the field. In addition, he has served on as board chair and board member of nonprofit boards. Currently, he sits on the board of directors of the California Association of Independent Schools, Private School Access, Los Encinos Schools, and the advisory board of the National Diversity Coalition. Luthern is deeply committed to democratizing meaningful access to high quality education for socioeconomically disadvantaged students and to developing schools built on well-being that are catalysts for social transformation. So it's my great pleasure to welcome and thank Luthern Williams for being on Curiosity Invited. And that is recording. Good. Just to let you know, I just did your bio and intro a little while ago, so okay. I'm not gonna go through that again because it's all on tape already. And what I am gonna say, thank you so much for agreeing to speak, Luthern. It's good to see you. Truth in advertising, I should tell everybody that we are friends. And I already told them all of your accomplishments and how and where you are right now. I did not say, however, that I was the founding head of New Road School, and after I left in 2013, there was another fellow who took over, and happily, this fellow, Luthern Williams, took over 2 years after that, and I'm super pleased about that. And good to see you. And I know you're busy, and I really appreciate you devoting this time to this conversation. And I'll let you know, this can be as formal or conversational and exploratory as you want. So we'll start and we'll see where we go. And so I'm probably going to ask you questions that I know what you think about. So, it's not the fact that my hair is gray and that I've lost my memory. It's that I want to make sure other people get to hear your voice about certain things. So the first question I have is, like, really, you read that bio and here you are talking about a school with love and respect. And it's like, so I get the respect and I get the dignity and I get the academic excellence. It's like, but, as Tina Turner might ask, what's love got to do with it? I mean, it's school. What I know that's important to you. Why is it important in education?
Well, it's interesting, David, and thank you for having me. I remember when I first interviewed at New Roads, and I met all of these various people. And I remember after that day, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and I said, I heard the word love used several times at this school, and I was in tears. And I was in tears because I realized that I'd never heard the word love used in my own education, not in all of the years that I had been in education. And
you mean both as a student and as a person working in education? Yeah.
No, and not at all. Never heard it. I never thought that love belonged in schools. I didn't even think, what would that even mean? And I think I've come over time to understand what it means at New Roads. And part of it means sort of being able to hold space and to allow people to show up as who they are authentically, and to take off their mask, to take off their armor, to invite them to be who they are, which I think is profound. I don't think most of us find ourselves in spaces where we can do that.
Yeah, I will say, I hope this isn't just nostalgic, but I will say that aspect of education, that piece, inviting people to show up as themselves, was probably if I had to identify one thing that mattered most when I was there, was exactly that. And if I had to identify the one thing that I think made the school feel so welcoming and comfortable and energized and well-meaning and all of those positive adjectives, it was that folks felt, and wanted to, folks felt invited to show up as exactly that, who they are. And that was, at least back then, and I suspect it's kids, so it always will be. It was zany and fun and serious and real emotions in the. I remember like not understanding what people would talk about when they would speak about kids getting out of school and entering the real world. It's like, really? It's going to get more real than this? Because folks showed up as really who they were. So you need to do something. You need to get that.
No, I don't. I am just trying to turn off this phone.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it's and do you think that has that piece of it has an effect or contributes in some way to academic performance?
I think it has a profound impact, David. I think when you guys started the school, I don't think the research had really caught up to education. And I think now it's clear that the diversity of the students really has a huge impact on all of the outcomes of kids, even in terms of, how deep they think critically, whether they're creative problem solvers. And I think the piece that, of kids being able to show up as who they are, you can't really leverage that diversity unless you're in an environment where kids feel like they're able to show up as who they are.
So could you say something about what you mean by diversity here? Because are you pointing at ethnic, racial diversity primarily? You know, the thing that, depending upon where you are, either has a positive valence or a negative valence, because we, after all, live in the years of culture wars, where diversity is a bad word in some places and otherwise. But is that what you mean, or do you mean the full diversity of human experience that shows up in a young person?
Well, and I think you know what I mean, which is, I think it's the diversity of human experience. It started out with you guys making a commitment to socioeconomic, racial, and cultural diversity that was reflective of the city, because how are these kids going to, learn how to accept the full spectrum of humanity if they don't start by living and learning together? And I think what that did was create this environment in which all kinds of diversity started to emerge, and people felt supported in being who they are. So I think that the diversity at New Roads is diversity of all kinds, even diversity in terms of ideology, perspective, ideas. I mean, I think the kids have this unusual ability to be able to be respectful of one another, even if they disagree, or even if they don't initially see that they share some commonality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And so go back to that piece about academic, or academic is probably the wrong word, but educational, intellectual performance, and how you see it relating to that diversity piece, or that welcoming piece.
Well, I think it's twofold. I think one is, if we're in a conversation, and essentially I think education inquiry is about going on a journey together, that journey is going to be much more complex and much more interesting if we both are sharing our perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can imagine that amplified in a classroom where you have kids who are comfortable enough to share their perspective that's built on their experience, their lived experience, and the different ways that they go at solving problems. So you're becoming more expansive in that experience. The people who are being exposed to various points of view, they're having to question their own assumptions about themselves, about others, about the world. And that becomes a constant process. So it becomes a habit where you are intellectually open, because everything you thought was so solid and you thought was so clear may not be so clear.
Mm-hmm. So you say you made reference to schools, education, both your own education and the places you worked at, and what do you think those places would think of the place that you are guiding right now as the head of the school? I mean, is there a sense that do you have a sense that more and more educators, more and more schools will sort of look at what you're doing and say, yes, that is just really interesting and excellent, or what the hell are those guys doing? Like, why are they wasting their time doing this, that, or the other thing? Have those, you know what I mean? I mean, what do they think of you?
Well, what do they think of me?
Not you, but you know what you're doing. Well, what do they think of you is a whole other thing, right?
What do they think of me? Well, that's a whole nother show. But I think that part of it, David, is I think that we're living in an age where the industrial model of education, where one size fits all, is breaking down. It's not working. And I think that became even more obvious during the pandemic. And so I think that people are looking for different answers for how do we educate kids in a way that's built on well-being and allows them to reach their full potential. So I do think that there are more places that are looking to places like New Roads to say, what have you guys been doing? We considered that alternative at the beginning, but maybe this is not alternative. Maybe this is the way education needs to be. So I do think that there is a shift.
Yeah. It's interesting. There was a point in your career where you were the director of diversity. Windsor School?
Yeah.
I don't really know much about, and I'm assuming back then the diversity that, well, maybe it's still the same, but the diversity that people were pointing at was ethnic, racial, cultural, whatever. And it seems like you now, and New Roads generally, right, have a bigger take on that, have a bigger perspective about what that means. And could you talk about that a bit? Like, oops, sorry, there's a ringing in my phone as well.
Well, I think there's something really interesting about New Roads, and I credit you in part for this, which, I remember talking to one of the African American alums from New Roads who said that you extended humanity to everyone and allowed everyone to see their own humanity. And I think that, I think New Roads to me is built on this whole idea that, everyone is worthy of respect and dignity. And I think the old model of diversity is it's something that, is something you begrudgingly do because it's the right thing to do, but not that it actually has value. And I think from the very beginning at New Roads, diversity was considered to have essential value that would add to the learning environment for everyone. And I think that that's still very true today.
Yeah, I think, I'd like to sound like a genius.
Maybe you are.
Wait, I know the truth, and my wife really knows the truth. I think the impetus when we began was, I'm not ashamed of it, but the impetus when we began was more a socio-moral impetus, right? It's like, it's just not fair that the resources are distributed in this way. And so the effort to open the doors to more families who could not afford what independent schools had to charge just to keep the lights on, right? We needed to, that was the model. It was like diversity, inviting diversity because of social justice reasons, right? And I think you're right. Is maybe this is my genius, right? I learned, I learned instantly, almost instantly, certainly in the first year, really by walking around and listening to the conversations among children, among kids, middle school kids, that were in many cases as if not more sophisticated than the conversations I was having when I was teaching, seniors ready to go off to college, or even young people in college in their first couple of years of college. And here were middle school kids having on their own conversations about those things, and it was like, what the hell's going on here? And I think it was, what you said a little while ago. It was having that mix of points of view that you never got in a much more homogeneous world. Just it was like, oh, we have to up our game here, right? I mean, these kids with this formula, it wasn't that the kids were so brilliant, which they were, right? But it wasn't that they just were, we've cherry picked for the most brilliant kids in Los Angeles. We didn't have that option. But these kids being together and being invited to be who they were was like, you put the ingredients in and it was like, oh, wow, this is really interesting. So I wish I had known that before starting, but I learned it pretty quickly. And I think you're right. And I know you're right that the research sort of caught up, right? And now it's wonderful that there's a bunch of evidence that suggests, look, there's a real all that stuff you guys say you care about. I don't mean you, I mean educators, academic excellence and rigor and intellectual curiosity and all that. It is affected by, it is enhanced by diversity of all sorts. So I wonder if I wonder if you'll talk about this. I know there's something there, but as you've both embraced and built on that idea of diversity, what do folks say? I mean, do you get any pushback from communities that are sort of just catching up with diversity means making sure that that the identity groups that we're all familiar with are represented? Do you get any like, you guys are going too far too fast? You're not emphasizing the right things. We should be talking about race. We should be talking about ethnicity. We should be talking blah, blah, blah.
Well, I think David, that I think it's been tough in these polarized times to hold on to a vision of a school like New Roads. Because I think fundamental to my conception of New Roads is it's based on the encounter of people who are different with one another. And they are inevitably going to bump into one another and make mistakes with one another, and that's where the learning begins. I think we live in a world where it's very difficult for people to have the grace to allow others to make mistakes and to assume best intention and to turn that into a moment or opportunity for growth and learning. And so I think New Roads is, in my mind, built on that, which is very difficult in this day and age, because I think people talk about accountability. And to me, the real question is, what do you mean by accountability?
How does that show up, if you can talk about that a bit? How does that show up at the school? I mean, how does that?
A kid may make a remark that is considered a microaggression or racially insensitive, gender insensitive, and be insensitive in some way. And developmentally, if you're talking about a 9th and 10th grade boys, this is exactly where they are. They think things are funny until they know they're not funny. And that part of what we're doing is human development there. And to me, the accountability is sort of saying, okay, let's figure out how this landed for that other person. And let's figure out how it is that you can accept responsibility for how it landed on this other person. And hopefully you can sort of think about how you can be more mindful in your actions and your words, because it's a different story to me if you intentionally hurt somebody versus someone who is unaware and who needs to grow and develop, which I think is the case for school-age children.
And do your teachers do all of the, well, you probably hire teachers that agree with that, but do your parents and teachers have to be brought along in that?
Not everyone agrees with it. And I think it goes back to what, does social justice require? And for me, social justice is about an evolution of consciousness. And how do you get to that evolution of consciousness where people are mindful of their words and mindful of their actions, and they make choices and think about the impact those choices have on other people? To me, that's kind of what we're trying to teach the kids. I'm not trying to give them a script of what's politically correct and say, you need to follow this. I'm trying to get them to be free so that they are not just automatically doing things that they're not even conscious that they're doing.
Yeah. What happens when teachers come in, because teachers come from different places where that may or may not be the attitude, and then they come into this odd environment. I mean, I know you made, at least in the bio, there's reference to professional development, both professional development, but also the, for lack of a better term, onboarding of of new teachers, like I know you've gotten and well-deserved pats on the back for the program there. And I wonder if you would speak about that. Like what do you do when the teacher shows up and you think this is a great math teacher and come on in and yada, yada, yada.
Well, I think it's really hard to get it right at New Roads because it is such a unique culture. I think, because I think that the school is, very layered. And I think you have an initial impression of it. And I think that deepens over time. I think that part of the professional development we ask people to do, and I think it goes back to what you guys said in the mission, which was basically that parents need to grow and learn in order to treat the young accurately and wisely. I think that's true of the teachers as well. And I think that what we ask the teachers to do is not only sort of give them the tools of professional development, but to ask them to really think consciously about themselves and to self-examine and to think about how they need to continue to evolve in order to serve these kids. And I think for some people, they don't want to do that. And so I don't think New Roads is going to work for them because I think it's a place that constantly asks all of us to be in a state of evolution.
And does that include you?
Yes, it includes me 100%.
Are you willing to speak about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that.
What have you learned since you've been there?
Oh my God, I've learned so much. I think it is a community that is deeply intellectual, but also, I think, moved by the heart. And there's a way in which I myself have had to crack open and share very sort of intimate, what I consider intimate parts of myself with the community at different times because they needed to connect with me in that way in order for me to be able to lead the community. And that's at times been very hard for someone who grew up very, work is this and family is this, and there are clear lines between the two. And again, I had to show up as who I authentically was, and I didn't have the luxury of hiding behind my role.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, you bet. That's not an easy climb, is it? No, that's really something. Yeah. And I guess for some people it doesn't work and they leave, or they either they leave or they're asked to leave. But probably
they've gone underground. They're like, how did I end up in Wonderland? I mean, like, it's sort of. The Mad Hatter is after me.
Hey, so I'm gonna switch. I'm not even sure I'm not even sure we're changing directions in any way. But the other term that shows up when you talk about New Roads, in addition to love, which is such a rare and important conversation in education, but so rare to hear it, is well-being. And so what do you mean by that? Why do you think that's important? And how do you address that?
Well, I think that I'll start with the last part first, which I think it's built into, and has always been built into the school, the idea that we're not teaching disembodied brains and that we're teaching whole human beings. So if a kid's having a bad day, bad social day, that can easily come into the classroom and not only affect that student, but affect other students. And we care about the environment that's created in the classroom, and we care about that student. And so you have to look at them as full human beings with social emotional needs that impact the learning, and that it's all integrated. You can't separate. And I think, it's clear, from a neuroscience perspective that that's true, but I think education is especially as we go through the years from K-8 to high school, I think it becomes more and more compartmentalized It becomes more that the kids aren't treated as though they're human, and that people think only they only need to fill their cognitive needs.
Mhm. And does that, I mean, is there something in the curriculum that addresses that, or is it in the approach that you encourage teachers to take, or
Well,
how?
I think it's a both and, David, because it's like we've now start to talk about the pedagogy at New Roads as sort of, teachers as empathic facilitators of human development. That basically they are there, that the subject matter is a means to human development. And so I think in the pedagogical approach, it's that being present for the kids, it's being aware of the social emotional environment that's created in the class. Is that optimal for learning? What are you bringing into the class? And how is that impacting the social emotional field for the learning? I think there's always been, the workshops and mysteries curriculum and counsel. So the kids practice counsel from the time they're in kindergarten, and they learn what now I call the 5 intentions, because you were the one that alerted me to one of them, and I actually have incorporated it and ask everyone to do that.
Yeah.
But speak from the heart, listen from the heart, be lean, be spontaneous, and invite complementary and contradictory views.
Yeah.
And so I think our students learn to practice that from the very beginning. And then also in the elementary school, they have these lofts and different areas that are called Zen zones. So basically, if they need time to go and write, in order to self-regulate, they do that. They know how to practice yoga. They practice mindfulness.
This is at the elementary school.
Yes. So you need to come and
So okay, so one can imagine, right, that elementary school and maybe moving towards middle school, there is at least more conceptual space in people's minds for lack of a better term, for warm and fuzzy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got high school, and now folks are thinking about, well, high school, they've got to take those SAT exams, and they've got to get through algebra 2 and chemistry and yada yada yada. And it's at least the popular understanding of things is that warm and fuzzy is fine, but you got to learn to speak Spanish and do well in the bubble exams. And by the way, you have to get to AP calculus or whatever the hell it is that people are, right, that stuff they carry around. So how do you get the high school teachers and kids to sort of to incorporate that same attitude, right? Some kids, if kids have come from kindergarten, well, maybe it's so much a part of them that is just there. But when kids come from other places, suddenly you're confronted with like, what the hell is this? What you want me to do? What? This is my math class. Why am I doing like what? So how do the teachers do that?
I think
How do you do that?
I think that the teachers are definitely on a continuum, and I think it's a work in progress in the high school, because we have people who are incredibly bright as teachers who are devoted to the subject matter. And I think that part of the professional development we do, because we do a lot around the neuroscience and interpersonal neurobiology, in terms of helping them understand the connection to optimal learning. That these things actually contribute to how well and how deep and how enduring the learning will be. So I think that's always back to, for the teacher, it's like, why? It's like, yes, your primary task, even if you see your primary task as learning, how do we optimize the learning? And the well-being is at the foundation of that. And even in terms of giving the kids, wellness breaks in class to recharge their brains. We know that their brains need to recharge after about 20 minutes, and that they will be much more attentive and alert if
What
they're
does a
getting
wellness break look like?
a wellness break. Can look like anything the teacher is comfortable with. Sometimes it's playing music, sometimes it can be meditation, sometimes it can be just stretching, sometimes it can be just allowing for a walk. It
Yeah.
is really an opportunity for them just to reset.
And is that built into in many classes or in all classes, whatever?
That
Is that
is
built
that is
into?
what we're building toward in the high school.
Yeah.
I will say we're building towards that because I do think that that is a shift. And I think part of that happened during the pandemic as well. Like it was accelerated during the pandemic because we realized we couldn't do teaching the way we always had, in a remote environment.
Mhm.
And so we actually created Wellness Wednesday, which really focused on connection with self, connection with others, and connection with the community. And so I think what ended up happening, as things do, is once we started to move away from survival mode in the pandemic and away from the remote, the wellness piece started to leave as well in
Mm.
that way. And but I think that in our teaching philosophy that we have committed to, we've committed to building it into practice. And
That's so good to hear. I have asked this question of people in education. I was going to call them educators, but I'm not necessarily going to, because I'm not sure. but I've asked the question, what have you learned throughout the pandemic? Are there things you bumped into that you want to hold on to, because at least this aspect of that, it's like, so this is the first time anybody's had an actual real response to that question. Is like, that's a great thing to know. That, I think it's like the idea
because
that's
we had to ask ourselves, David, that it gave us this unique opportunity to ask ourselves what matters now.
yeah
Because we realized people couldn't depend on, okay, I'm going to teach all this content through this remote environment, and have that turn into enduring understanding. And so we had to say to ourselves what matters. And we realized it was loving the kids, educating them, and having them still feel connected. And so how could we humanize this medium, to promote that connection? And I think that the well-being part grew out of that. It grew out of this sense that their well-being had to be fundamental, not something that we add on like SEL, but
Right.
it had to be foundational.
Social emotional learning, for those who have not heard that term. But yeah, that's great. That's terrific. And you're talking about this. I mean, is this a conversation that is being spoken about in the broader world of education? I know you're on various boards, and I know you're on the California Association of Independent Schools. And is there a sense that that's an understanding that's growing among at least the administrators, et cetera, in the places that you're showing up, whether it's the National Association or California Association?
Well, I think especially in the National Association, I see there is a clear sense that schools have to do learning differently. And part of that is that well-being and diversity, equity, inclusion have to be central in the model for schools as they move forward. I think that there's always, I think that the struggle that people have, which I think is kind of a false dichotomy between sort of academic excellence and rigor and wellness and diversity, equity, inclusion. I think they are integral to each other and not in opposition to one another. But I do think there is a consciousness and I think that existed, David, before even the pandemic, because of the global pandemic we were having with mental health of students. And I think because if we don't get the mental health piece right and the well-being piece right, then none of the rest really matters. You can't, build a house on a faulty foundation.
Mhm. Mhm. So I don't want to put you on the spot here, but I don't want to put you on the spot. That almost sounded like I want to put you on the spot,
Yeah.
but I do not. But so tell me it's an unfair question, but well-being, wellness, well-being is a bigger term. It's a more encompassing term than diversity, equity, inclusion. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is the umbrella under which other things live, and that's got to make you alternatively, celebrated and and villainized to take that position, especially in these times. So I'm glad that you are. I'm glad that you do, because I think that there's there's almost a, it's almost like DEI work, diversity, equity, inclusion work was becoming, maybe still is, a kind of an exercise in gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, aha,
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that you,
Mm-hmm.
and which, clearly that can't be
Mm-hmm.
the goal. That certainly can't be the stopping place. Everybody sort of trying to catch somebody else doing something wrong.
Well, it's interesting because I think it's becoming clear, and especially with racism, even with the research that's done, that the perpetrator of racism also is impacted even on a physiological level by the racism, and so it's not everyone is impacted negatively by it. And so I think that it really, to me, comes down to well-being and freedom, like that, these things impact all of us. And none of us can truly be free and embrace our full humanity until some of these social constructs are gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do the kids feel that way?
I think yes. I actually think this generation is a very interesting one, because in many ways they are fascinated with labels, but they also reject labels. I see this as a generation that really wants to be called what it wants to be called, at a particular time. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And
Oh, that's so
I
yesterday.
think there's a striving toward, David, claiming their full humanity and their freedom to become whoever they are. I think that underlying it, that's how I see it, is that they really don't want people to constrain them
in any group,
in any way.
right?
You know what I want?
Yeah.
And so I think that I think a lot of people find it really confusing. But
You
I
mean
find
you
it
mean the students? You mean the kids, or
the
you mean the
adults.
adults?
The
Yeah.
adults. No, I don't think the kids. I think the kids are fine with it. They're like, oh well, this is who you are today. Okay,
Whatever.
great. You know what I want? You know what
Yeah.
I'm like? I think it's the adults. I think the adults are very confused by it.
It's interesting you do that. You're saying that because it's I think right from the start, well, maybe this is always the case, and this is just ho-hum, but the kids have always led that piece, right? I mean, they had a much easier time with diversity when we first started the school than their parents did. That, I mean, much easier. And then some of the teachers did, although, when we first started, it was so small that it was easy to, professional development was pretty easy. We sat on the couch, all of us. and but I think it was so clear with parents, the kids had an ease with one another. It wasn't perfect, right? I mean, there were events, and I think my attitude back then is very similar to yours in that, the events, somebody rubbing somebody the wrong way, somebody saying something in a way that hurts somebody else's feelings, somebody just being ignorant or insensitive, were up. I mean, we sort of dealt with them as these are opportunities. This is not like a hand grenade destroying the place. This is the reason why we want diversity. This is what has to be unpacked and unwound and made into something that allows us to grow. And but the parents didn't necessarily feel that way. There was always the, like those things you find outside used car dealerships, those things that are blown in. It's like, oh my God, the sky is falling. It's like, whoa, calm down.
Well, and I think it's become increasingly hard, as I mentioned earlier, in a polarized society.
Yes.
To hold on to that view of education.
Yeah. Do you, well, this is tapping your non-education brain. Do you feel like when you look out in the world, do you think the pendulum is moving back in the direction towards embracing difference, or do you think we're still moving in the direction of more and more polarized?
I unfortunately, I see more and more polarization. I think I think that education has to be clear about what its role is in society and what its role isn't. And for me, I think that, we're in the business of really developing human beings and giving them a space in which they can become and learn how to be good people who hopefully will serve the common good. So I will continue, as long as I lead New Roads, I will continue to sort of to advocate that, because I think it's going to be important for our kids to be the kind of bridge builders who can help find common ground if we're going to survive. And so that's where my hope resides. My hope resides in trying to help cultivate a generation of kids who can be those bridge builders.
Yeah. Yeah, I think educators, well, maybe not all, but I know it was true for me, being around young people, spending my days around young people. Wasn't like I was not exhausted at the end of the day, but I was way more hopeful. Right? I mean, they saw things. It was almost like they saw things. I heard somebody say this, and it just seems so right. Young people, we look at what's going on. Young people sort of look off to the side and they see all these things that are going on that people aren't talking about except them. And so they're pointing it out. And then as we move towards adulthood, it's like we learn to stay in this lane rather than look at all those other possibilities. And being around kids who are, they ask all those great questions, and it's a wonderful at least it was for me. It made me a more hopeful person. It made me a more optimistic person about the way the world was heading, and and even in troubled times. I'm wondering, and again, this may be, if it may feel like I'm switching tracks here, but are there things that the world are there things you want to talk about the future of New Roads? I mean, are there things that are going on at the school that feel like, ooh, this is exciting, or
Well, I'm really excited about the emphasis on well-being in all of its dimensions, whether it's physical, emotional, spiritual, financial. I think that at New Roads, we are thinking very intentionally about how we ground the school in well-being at the foundation. And we want to build a wellness center that is a counterpoint to, I think, what the theater was a testament to creativity, human creativity, and the role that plays in education. I think, this part, to me, the wellness piece will be the other piece, and the centrality of wellness in preparing kids for the future.
Yeah. Well, I want to give you an opportunity, because you and I know the place, right? I mean, I knew it then, and I periodically get to go visit, and but I don't think, and I didn't speak about this in the introduction. I spoke about you, but I want to make sure that people understand, right? I mean, it is, New Roads is an independent school in Los Angeles, or in Santa Monica, but Los Angeles County. And nobody has to do much research to know, wow, tuition's really expensive there. But it is a unique place. So this is just, this is a school for rarefied kids in a rarefied environment. And sure, good and well for you to talk about all these things, but who the hell can afford all that tuition dollars? So I want to make sure that folks understand that, yes, that is true for many independent schools, but this is a unique place. So I want to give you an opportunity to sort of, especially say it in your words, because I don't want to say it in 2013 words.
Well, it's interesting, and David, I think that one of the things, I love about New Roads, and I frequently say this when I talk about it, is, to me, in many ways, it feels like a test case for Brown versus the Board of Education, because the integration was such a failure. And still in the 90s, you did not have a school that reflected the socioeconomic, racial, and cultural diversity of Los Angeles that offered all kids a high quality education that was rich in the arts. And I'm very proud of the fact that New Roads was one of the schools to step up to say that, all children deserve this kind of wonderful education, and deserve to be able to have that kind of education that will allow them to determine their own destiny. And I think the school has been true to that throughout, no matter what the challenges are. So that, it's always been 40 to 50% of our kids have been on financial aid. And the school forgoes over 30% of its budget to support that financial aid, because we don't have the endowment. And the way we've been able to do that is, I think we've been able to sacrifice some other things because we walk our talk. I think we believe you need great teachers in the classroom, a great program, and we will do the best we can with the facilities we have. But the people are more important than the facilities. And I think that's always been the case. And so and I think the faculty and the staff are very proud of the fact that, over a third of our budget goes to financial aid.
So maybe it's obvious to people, but it wasn't to me when I first got involved in independent schools. So what that means is that some people some people pay some families pay the full tuition, and other families pay less than the full tuition, and some families pay very little. And you used to, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you used to, you had data about, the range,
Yep.
which was significant, right? I mean, it was like the full freight was almost, well, at the time it was close to 40,000, maybe
Mhm.
more than that now. And that's a year. And yet there were people, not just one, there were people paying significantly less. And I'm sure that's still the case, but I would.
Yeah, I think, David, there are families who pay, a few $100s a year to go to the school because the assumption is that everybody needs to contribute something.
Mhm.
But I think, and we have probably a higher percentage of students who would be the equivalent of getting a Pell Grant in college than a lot of elite colleges by proportion, because we devote so much to trying to make sure that especially students whose families make 60,000 or less, that they have an opportunity to get this kind of education, because we know it can break cycles of poverty and really open up opportunities to break, generational cycles of poverty, and to give students the opportunity to really live their dreams.
Mhm.
And we also have a significant number of working class families, of middle class families, of upper middle class families, and the very, very wealthy. And that's all by intention and by design. And the board actually we have a dashboard. So when admissions reports their figures for each year, those are part of their reports.
Mhm. And is it important so the board is usually boards of independent schools are often comprised of the largest donors, the most influential. So is there diversity among board members as well? And is it important? Is it an important feature of the or belief, attitude of the board to preserve that? I mean, I know, I used to insist that, so because there is an inclination to sort of, look, we need more money. Hey, admit more people who can pay. And it was, but the board always held on to that mission. Is it important at the board level still?
Yes, I think a lot of the board members serve the school for the exact reasons that the staff and the faculty do, because they believe in the vision of the world that New Roads embodies.
Mhm.
And they believe that, that the people at the table should reflect, to the extent possible, the school. So the diversity on the board is very important as a value. And also we do a lot of work with the board, which is unusual, where we have, our director of student well-being, who does the DEI, sits on the governance committee of the board. And we really look at sort of how it is that is our governance practices and decision-making process. Is that inclusive? And what are the complications of making that inclusive, which I think a lot of boards aren't willing to do,
Mhm.
look at themselves in that light.
He
Well,
said,
I think that the board is also committed to creating a pipeline, particularly of people who've been underrepresented on boards,
that's great.
through the New Roads board, so that not only to serve on our board, but to be able to serve on other boards as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow. That's pretty cool.
Well, I think the last things that, I realized that I hadn't talked specifically about the kids, and one of the things that it just amazes me is every year I write recommendations for college for probably about 3 or 4 of them. And I did this year. They asked me, and I think they don't ask me because they don't think I'm going to say yes, some of them, but I'm like, oh, if you ask me and I know you, of course I'm going to say yes. And I remember, one of them, he's a musician and he decided that he was going to um, do an independent study with his English teacher. Um, and his English teacher is an expert on Shakespeare. So he decided the teacher assigned him The Tempest, and that he didn't know that The Tempest was a pro-colonial work. And so once he discovered that, then his teacher had him read Aimé César's The Tempest, which is a response to it. And then he decided that he was going to create an album with all of these various genres, including classical and rap, and he learned, several languages and worked with people around the world to create an album, which, became his independent study project.
Wow,
Um,
that's amazing.
and it was just, to me, a testament to what this environment really is like, and then we had another young woman, and she's someone who's always been a super high achieving student and been in the highest math classes and one of the only girls in some of the high level math classes. And she talked about how, she constantly had to make her voice heard among some of the boys, and that, and to challenge some of their assumptions. And she said that that led her to become a part of Feministas, which is a club at New Roads. And she decided to lead that club. But she's a young Jewish woman from an affluent background. And she said, I decided I wanted to read bell hooks, to understand what my role as an affluent white young woman is in the feminist movement, and what are some of the obstacles I bring as a result of my lack of consciousness.
Hmm.
And I was just blown away, you know, by who these kids are. And not only are they just deep thinkers and wonderful human beings, but they're likable people.
Hmm.
And and once I had written all the recommendations, I'm like, I really like these people.
Hmm.
And I think whenever I get depressed about the world and its condition, I just think of them, and they're my stars, my North Star.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. That's beautiful, actually. Gosh, that sounds so. Yeah, that's inspiring. Those kids, damn those kids, they're so inspiring.
Well, I think it's interesting, David. I think that's the environment that has been created. I was not a part of my own education. I was simply a robot going through the process and
Yeah.
engaged.
And do you want to speak at all about your education? You went to, you don't have to name names if you don't want to, but you went to, you were in public school, and then your parents moved you into an independent school, private school?
Yeah, I started out in a working class African American neighborhood in Los Angeles. And my parents soon realized, when I was very young and I had four siblings, that the schools weren't quite the same on the other side of the valley, which was very affluent. And so they said, we can't afford to send 5 kids to private school, but we can try to buy a house in that community. And they actually had trouble buying a house in that community because there were no African Americans in the community. And then one of my dad's friends, he told the real estate people, either you give them the house or I will buy it and give it to them. And so my parents were able to get the house. And then I ended up by high school going to private school, but it was and on a football scholarship, but it was a very traditional private school. It was not New Roads.
Right.
And I went on, I got a perfectly good education in a traditional sense. It prepared me for college, but I didn't realize that you could be a part of your own educational experience until I actually was in college.
Mhm.
And the rest of it was just a matter of enduring it.
And it's a rare, I mean, it's growing, I know, but you you don't find many African-American heads of school. You don't find many African-American
Heads of much.
teachers, administrators, directors in education generally, but you certainly don't find many heads of school who are African-American. And is that still true? Are you a minority, as it were?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's still true. I think California is doing a little bit better than some other parts of the country, but it's still true that African Americans are definitely a small minority group within the heads of school in the country.
And does that, do you feel it when you feel it is, I don't quite know what I mean by that conversation, by that term, but do you feel it when you go to conferences? You certainly notice it, right? You look around and, hey, hey, which one of these is not like the other, right? But does it have an impact in that?
Well, I think it's part of, thinking about, do I want to be the one to say X, Y, and Z and cause a disturbance, or do I just need to keep my mouth shut today? And I think that's how I feel it is constantly making a choice as to whether I want to raise something that's not being raised.
Right. That's not being raised, and that you understand the reason, one of the likely reasons it's not being raised is because there is not the same diversity of experience in the room as
that's it. Yes, that's exactly it. And I have to just decide, do I want to take this on right now? Right. Do I feel like I can take this on right now?
Right.
Do I feel like it's going to make a difference?
Right.
What's at stake for me if I do take it on?
Right.
In terms of relationships. I mean, I think,
can people hear it right now?
Yeah,
right.
Can people hear it right now? So I think there are all those things that go through my mind. And then I also have, tried to reach out and support other African-American heads who are newer to the job, because, I didn't have that kind of resource. I do now, because I have a really wonderful mentor in Ravita Bowers, but that wasn't the case when I first started.
Yeah. Yep. We have a ways to go in this world. Yeah. Well, I don't want to eat up your day.
Okay.
And of course, I don't want you to be so eager to get off, but no, I don't want to eat up your day. But and we'll have opportunity.
I think there's a part 2 here. I think there's a part 2.
Yeah. Think about what part 2 should include. And let's. I always enjoy speaking with you. As I said at the beginning, truth in advertising, we know each other and we're friends. And but think about what part 2 looks like, and I will as well. And once again, Luthern Williams, New Road School, a wonderful. I loved that it says a visionary educational leader, because I think that's exactly what you are, and I'm so glad that you are there, even on those days when you're not necessarily glad you're there. And so thank you so much for spending time doing this. I really appreciate it. I really do.